Quinta Noval Unfiltered Late Bottled Vintage Port is a very important part of the Noval range, and it's a wine I take extremely seriously. Late Bottled Vintage, as its name indicates, is a wine from a single harvest, but it's a wine that is bottled a few years after that harvest, later than we would bottle a classic vintage port. And that's why it's called late bottled vintage port. So a classic vintage port will be bottled 2 years after the harvest, and a late bottled vintage can be bottled 4, 5 or 6 years after the harvest. What this means is that the wine will have had some extra years of aging in large oak barrels, usually containing about 6,000 litres, not new oak, very important that it shouldn't be new oak. And the result of that is that the wine will have developed considerably more by the time we bottle it, and that means that you have a much more accessible wine, a wine that is ready to drink sooner than a classic vintage port would be, but which has all the characteristics of the finest vintage port. This wine is the 2014 Quinta Noval Unfiltered Late Bottled Vintage Port. Like all Quinta Noval late bottled vintages, this comes 100% from our vineyard. This is important because Quinta Noval, with its 145 hectare estate in the heart of the Douro, is one of the great vineyard terroirs of the world, which is the place where we make our great vintage port, and of course the legendary National vintage port. These are among the very greatest ports that are made, and the late bottled vintage is also exclusively from this vineyard, and what is more, is a very strict selection from that vineyard. So this 2014 actually represents just actually about 14% of the production of the Quinta, and that's a very strict selection because there were a lot of very fine wines made at Noval in 14, but we selected some of the finest to make this late bottled vintage port. It's unfiltered, and this is important as well because it means that the wine can develop in the bottle if you want to leave it. It's designed to be ready for you to drink now, but if you actually buy a few bottles and keep a few of them for a few years, you will see they will continue to develop and improve. And it's also important to note that this is treated exactly the same way as we treat the vintage port when we make it. It's trodden by foot in lagars, and like the regular Quinta Noval vintage port. So what you have in this bottle of wine is a wine that is a true expression of the great vineyard terroir of Quinta Noval. It's a true expression of the lovely vintage year of 2014, and it's a very high quality glass of port that you can open now as soon as you buy it, or that you can wait for and see how it develops in the bottle. The choice is yours, but I hope you will enjoy the wine.